So I think being yourself and being real is even that much more important. I'm not saying AI is great at augmentation to advance, to do research, but at the end of the day, your voice should never get lost in, what your primary values are within your business. Why did you start your business? What is the service you're trying to offer? And how are your values in alignment with that? AI should supplement that, but not take over. So if someone goes on to something, it's like you and I with our podcast, and they're like, Louise doesn't talk like that, or Roxanne would never say XYZ, then people are going to then start to mistrust that you're not being as transparent as you need to be. So I know I use it with a lot of my team and we use it in different parts of my business. But at the end of the day, it has to be in alignment with what my brand is, which is focusing on relationships and the impact on people's mental well being.
Welcome to the Social Media Takeaway. I'm your host, Louise McDonnell, and this is the show for business people who want to learn how to use social media to drive sales and leads for their business. If you enjoy the show, make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. And if you didn't know, I do have a YouTube channel. You can watch it all back as well. If you know any friends, family, or any business groups who would benefit from this episode or any other episode, please make sure to share it with them. So today I am delighted to be joined by Roxanne Derhaj. Roxanne is a registered psychotherapist, corporate consultant, keynote speaker, trainer, best-selling author, and international podcaster. With over 20 years' experience, she works with senior leadership to enhance their resilience and assist companies with their corporate mental health strategies. Roxanne, you're very welcome.
Well, thanks for having me, Louise. I know it's been a bit of back and forth with you being across the pond, like we say, but my pleasure and all the little nicks along the way, but we're finally together. So thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for making the time to be here. Do you want to maybe start by giving everybody a little insight into your journey so far?
So my journey, I think, started just growing up in Trinidad and Tobago. So I grew up in the Caribbean, and I think I recognized that disconnection was a real thing. I had some primary understandings of it. I grew up in a very connected family, but within that family, there was some inconsistency. So I started to recognize this as a child, and the middle child of 6 children is like, I have to figure out a way to be able to, quote unquote, find my unique identity to get the needs met that I had. So connection was, middle child syndrome. I don't know how many people listening could relate. So I figured that out and really just loved, connecting and talking. And I often say that at that point, I think at 11 years old, I thought, well, this is kind of a thing. Now I grew up in a very traditional culture with the British school system, doctor, lawyer, engineer, nurse, and I'm like, I don't think I fit any of those. I said, what if they can like people would actually pay you to help people. And at that, little tween brain, I think I kind of conceptualized it and eventually decided my parents sent me abroad to study psychology in Toronto. And that's how my path began, starting to go to school and then do frontline work as a psychotherapist.
That was amazing at the age of 11 that you had that insight.
Well, I think, sometimes you don't know, right? Because I had friends, we laughed because we're all kind of the brats of the 70s, like they call us, because we all went all over the world. Actually, one of my best friends went to the Royal Academy of Surgeons to become a physician. And we don't, you realize how young you are and you don't know, then you think you know, right? And she, we're all finishing at 21, which like now you think, what 21-year-old would know? But she used to pass out in the watching her father do operations when she was 11. And guess what she's doing today? She's an eye surgeon. So you never know where things kind of come about. And you have these ideas to be able to want to do something. And then in my case, it ended up being something that actualized for me.
And so tell me a little bit more about your work.
Well, my work started frontline with doing trauma responses as a first responder with the Metro Toronto Police and, kind of meandered from specialties and addictions, complex PTSD, and then marriage and family therapy. It's just kind of touching like most new grads do. And then eventually started to work more in corporate strategy relatively early and loved it because I could actually kind of start to look at what kept people healthy. And in this case, my role in the executive strategy was what did people need to have happen to stay healthy and at work. So looking at the end of prevention versus kind of the unwell employee. So I kind of started working in that field, and it's really quite fascinating that you could kind of benchmark based on industry, based on demographics, based on sector and 24/7 services, that you could actually see what the demographics of the presenting issues for people being unwell were and kind of graphed it out to create plans. So that's the fascination part of it. And, the analytical part of my brain really loved it, right? Because we could look at, banking and see, kind of what were the lulls, what were the primary concerns people would go off with, how long would they be off? If you were to intervene with prevention, that in fact you could cut the time, the return, keep them at work and keep them healthy, and in fact save the company, of course, massive amounts of dollars. So that's the part that really ignited a spark in me to be able to help at a different level.
That is actually fascinating. So you can tell nearly down by the sector where people are going to potentially be unwell, be not happy, either go off work or leave.
Right. Like, say, for instance, something like law, right? I mean, something that we all can understand. So, lawyers in Canada, I worked with the Law Society across Ontario, which is our province, and they could not retain female lawyers within 5 to 7 years of them starting in the field because naturally, let's say they were going into having a family with the work-life balance concerns where, sometimes their hours were 60 to 80 hours. And anybody that really wanted to have more than just a job and maybe had to have a life, and where mothers really decided to use their feet and not stay in the field. So the law, had to look at, if they are wanting the perspective of female lawyers, what could they do? What should they be considering as a preventative measure to be able to obviously attract and retain female lawyers through this work-life kind of misbalance, I'm going to say, so that you don't lose them completely.
And tell me, was there anything then out of the stats that you were looking at that surprised you? Anything that stood out to you over the years?
Relationships are always number one that the concerns are, right? So hence why on my foray into what I ended up doing. So when I left consulting, I thought, what is it that we're all striving for, right? We're all striving for connection. We're all striving to get along, better at work, at home, in our communities, all those things. So it's ultimately that what we found across nationally for the company that I worked for, that 65% of people presented were with around relationship concerns. So it either could be work related, which showed us lower at that time. I think since, the pandemic, that would have shifted in numbers. But 65% of people that presented to a service line for relationship related concerns.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the pandemic there. Like, how has that impacted or is still impacting us today?
Well, I think, when you're in mental health and you picked the trajectory that I did years and years ago, it's a really good way to clear a room in that most people don't want to talk. They want to talk about mental well-being. But, on the counter side of mental well-being is mental unfitness or mental illness. So I think what has happened since the pandemic is we've created, unfortunately, with some unfortunate things, the capacity to recognize that we're no longer in the environments where we're going to break a leg or, get into most accidents, which are generally physically on the body. But in fact, it's invisible psychological strains on us today with most of what we do. I think of what you do or what I do, we're not doing much, quote unquote, physical heavy lifting, but we're doing a lot of psychological and emotional lifting in our careers. So I think it has created a space for people to actually start to say, how are you doing? Not how are your KPIs, how are your key performance indicators, how's your bottom line, but recognizing that your human capital is really the core fundamental thing that you need to keep your eye on, because the healthier people are, not just physically, because the mind and the body is the same. So I think we can have more of those conversations without, don't want to talk about anything personal, to be able to introduce those conversations. And you see a lot of companies today really keeping their eye on what's happening in companies. Like recently, a huge company applied a menopause policy. Imagine that.
Oh my God.
Oh my God. Yeah. So again, we're keeping our pulse on what's happening with people and recognizing if we want our companies to be productive and attract the right people, you have to create the services that are needed to keep people healthy and prevent them from going off work or going to your competitor.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. And so you've been working and helping people for many years now, Roxanne. Are the problems that you would have encountered 20 years ago any different to the problems that you encounter today?
I often think, when I think of my grandparents and they go, "Well, I don't know how you guys are going to cope today." And then we think of our children, and I don't know, Louise, if you have children, I have a 23-year-old, and I'm thinking, how is he going to cope? We are people and there are always problems. I think in today's society, though, what the issue is, disconnection is becoming more normative. So that is what I think is the biggest concern. And I know did you grow up in Ireland? You must have grown up in Ireland.
Yeah.
Well, kind of the basic things. Like I think if I grew up in the Caribbean, the family system, and I still had a mom at home, and you had structure and you had after school activities and stuff like that. But today, if you think about most of the work environments now, how many people are actually leaving home, right? Are they connecting? Are they doing the basic fundamental things like problem solving or dealing with concerns with people that aren't like them? Are they communicating what's really going on? A lot of the companies with younger people, I find that it's harder for them to discuss things openly because they've not have had as much practice, say, as us that maybe got thrown outside and like, the old joke is don't come back in till the street lights are on, because we were out there problem solving, fighting,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you know,
Climbing
creating
trees, jumping streams. Will I make it to the other side? Well,
right, having garden fights like I did with my siblings and
yeah.
warfare and strategy. We were learning all those things while all the while, being outside. And I think with the digitization, that's created a lot of disconnection where we have people valuing who they are based on some faceless celebrity that, is morphed into a superhuman that looks perfect all the time. And we have the younger generation now comparing on having a lot more depression and anxiety because of these unfair comparisons.
This is so true. And I suppose you've touched on it there, like social media, obviously. How do you see that impacting people?
Well, it's unfortunate, right? I think it's kind of like, when extracurricular activities used to be the babysitter, right? And now it's social media, unfortunately. And you're remiss at going to, out to a walk in the park or out in the mall and not seeing a 3-year-old with an iPad in their stroller. So that's what's unfortunately happening. Connection is being lost. And as human beings, we're mammals, right? We need the capacity to connect with real live human beings. And I think, unfortunately, with what's happening is, I was coaching a younger employee yesterday, and he literally says his pastime other than working is gaming. And so the basic fundamentals, and he's having trouble at work because he doesn't know how to quote unquote connect. Let's use the word make friends to get along. So some of the basic things that I'm thinking that I would have taught my 8-year-old just from, okay, you didn't get picked for the hockey team. Go out there and try to do your best. And you might have a bit of a tumbleweed with the people on your hockey team. You're going to have to figure it out. This young man, hadn't done it and was kind of in college and university when the pandemic happened.
Right.
Got into a job, kind of missed that space, got disconnected from friends. And now his kind of 25-year-old group aren't getting together as much. And now he's in the workplace and feels displaced. So you're getting a different kind of concern now, say, compared to when I was 25, which, was a different time.
Yeah, God, you can really see that happening, that kind of disconnection. And resilience is another thing as well. I think you see, like years ago, as you said, you would have been told, go and figure that out. And, if something happens, it's like, well, if you were.
Call me in if it's critical. And, but most times as kids, what do you do?
At one point, somebody was picking on me at school, and my mum said, "Just tell them get stuffed," and that was it. So I remember I was going back to school, and I was like, "Get stuffed, get stuffed." I was practicing it. But like nowadays they'd come in and they'd nearly move schools, So, and I think it's not good for the kids because they don't figure out how to build that resilience, So, what advice then would you give to anyone who's listening in here now in terms of whether they're a business owner themselves and they have a team of people? A lot of people now are working remotely or semi-remotely. So, like, what advice would you give to businesses that are in that situation?
Well, I think, if you are the owner or leader, it's your job to still know who's working for you. And I guess I would task you with saying, how well do you know them? If you have hired them, if you've never met them, meet them, right? And I think we've lost the water cooler kind of scenario, Louise, to be honest, where we would just kind of intuit, hey, Louise, it seems she's still been quiet this month or whatever. The leader or the owner of the company needs to say, how well do I know people? And am I getting remiss in recognizing that connection is going to look a little bit different? Who's on my team? How old are they? What experiences might they have had? And then they say you have a manager. are you relating to that manager to get the right information that you need to understand where people are at? And I think at the end of the day, and, I talk a lot about ROR, which is return on relationship, which is if you know what's happening in people's lives, what you can do is you can meet them where they're at. Because I think at the end of the day, most people want to do a great job. But if they're disconnected and they're feeling that you don't care in some way, and I'm not suggesting any warm, fuzzy kind of rah rah cheerleading, but just knowing, hey, so and so just had, you know, the dog just got put down, for instance. Keep that in the back of your mind. And, you might do something if let's say the person's more of quieter and introvert, you might send them a little email or something, say, hey, thought about this, must be tough, just because people want to know that you care. And I think at the end of the day, that's what you're trying to do. What is the pulse of your team? Okay, are they hitting the metrics that you need for productivity and innovation? Okay. Even if they are, what do you need to know that maybe you don't know? And I think that's what most CEOs that are successful or owners of companies, they can walk onto a floor. In this case, it could be a figurative floor or a digital floor, and be able to have people not stop conversation. It's like when the boss would show up and enter a meeting room, what would happen? We know the pulse of a boss, because that conversation would shift if that boss wasn't kind of liked. If that particular leader was liked, people kind of would include them. They would say, oh yeah, we were just talking about XYZ and the new shift in the IT system and the difficulties, and they would kind of flow with the conversation. I think as a leader, you still have to do the same things and think, who haven't I seen lately? How are you running your meetings? Are you using icebreakers? Are they getting to know what's going on with you? Or are you so shiny and bright, that quite literally they're having limbs fall off because they're so stressed, and you're looking like everything's a-okay? Because if you're not stressed and the company is stressed, they're thinking, well, it must be me. So maybe I should just kind of stuff it all in. And where's that going to go? That's going to go to their mental well-being and the level of what they're going to be able. They're going to give you what they call, I don't know if you've ever heard the term presenteeism, which is I'm going to show up, I'm going to, do what was expected of me, but you're not going to get any more, right? You want people to be fully and optimally available to function as best as they possibly can within your teams.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I suppose, yeah, it really just has changed so much in recent years with remote working, with social media, and AI is now beginning to come into our lives more and more. What do you think about that?
Well, AI is an interesting one, and I often, again, I talk about authenticity, and I say, what we want even more is we want even more authenticity now with AI. Now, I don't just know if you see the captions, not written by AI, written by. So people are now qualifying with a lot of things. I don't know if you've seen a lot of that. And conversations like this, people are going to want more. They're going to want to know who you are. They're going to want to know how you tick, why you tick. So I think being yourself and being real is even that much more important. I'm not saying AI is great in augmentation to advance, to do research, but at the end of the day, your voice should never get lost in, what your primary values are within your business. Why did you start your business? What is the service you're trying to offer? And how are your values in alignment with that? AI should supplement that, but not take over. So if someone goes on to something, it's like you and I with our podcast, and they're like, well, Louise doesn't talk like that, or Roxanne would never say XYZ, then people are going to then start to mistrust that you're not being as transparent as you need to be. So I know I use it with a lot of my team, and we use it in different parts of my business. But at the end of the day, it has to be in alignment with what my brand is, which is focusing on relationships and the impact on people's mental well-being.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I know you have your book there. We were just looking at it. So tell us a little bit about your book.
Well, I've written two. This is the second one. It's for those that have video. It's called ROR, Return on Relationships, Amplify Your Authentic Leadership to Build More Resilient Teams. So that was launched last year, and it's to work with leaders. And I think any of us could be a leader. Think about it. It's not that you have to have a massive team. You are leading when you go out to, drop off, the child to the baseball game, and you're part of that team. You're leading in some way. So the book was launched with the concept that things like decision-making, communication, connection are so very core and fundamental. So there's 5 areas that leaders work through, because I'm of the complete belief that if us in our capacity leading, if we're not aware of ourselves and our internal space, how can we effectively lead? right? So if I'm, my stress signature is worse at year end or month end and nobody can talk to me, I need to kind of be aware of how I come across to others and what kind of things I can do to address that, because I can't like kind of cut down people a couple of pegs and then come back Monday and say, "Hey, how's everybody? Did you have a great long weekend?" Because you still have people left in the shrapnel and they're like still pissed off about the fact that you were so rude on Friday. So I think it's that awareness. So the whole concept of the book is that in those 5 areas, we have responsibilities as leaders to take care of our internal space, and there that concentric circle kind of comes off us. And then in turn, what are others saying about you? Are they saying what you want to hear when you enter the room? Or are they truly having the feeling that, Louise is a really, really good communicator, but when she's under stress, she's not so good at decision making. You want the real core space of what people need from you, not what you think you need to hear from them to get them to be able to be productive and part of your team.
So you talk about the 5 factors. What are the 5 factors?
So awareness, communication, connection, balance processing, which is decision making, and recognition.
Okay, great. And so the book takes you through those five.
Every one of them, and it goes through an introspective lens of understanding it. So if you were to work through it as a team or within yourself as one-to-one coaching, what you would do is you'd come up with a heartbeat model of leadership. So you'd kind of know your own leadership internally and what kind of things you want to implement. And as the leader is going through this, the team is benchmarking how the leader is doing. So let's say you do the decision making. We're checking how you're doing with your team around your decision making as you go through that particular module. And then eventually we train the teams on the different modules so that they are aware of what you've been exposed to, but also for them to then start to think about what are they like in those areas and what do they need to enhance to be able to get back to be in alignment with the vision of the company. So again, if you have misalignment, if people don't get your excitement about this new product launch, if they don't see how they fit in that cog along the way, that disconnects happen. So we want to kind of get leadership more in alignment with where people are at. And then, it gives you something palpable to work with someone. Let's say they freeze under when they have to make big decisions. What do they need from you as a leader to be able to facilitate that space? Because that could make the difference between the breakdown of a launch, or it could be the best thing that could happen. So again, you want to enhance who's great, the skills that they're good at. Oh, that's great. We're not going to touch those. What are the areas that they're kind of struggling with? And then that's when the leadership or leader within that company is going to work to figure out what skill enhancements do they need and what is it that they need different from who manages them, or if it's from you as a leader. So you can kind of set those goals with them, and it becomes collaborative. The goal setting becomes collaborative. It's not a one down kind of autocratic, these are the goals, but what is it that you need from me collaboratively so that we can create that, goal together this quarter or this month to be able to progress along.
Okay. And I suppose the whole idea then is to get everybody in alignment with the values of the company so the company becomes more successful.
Absolutely. And if somebody's not in alignment, you're thinking, okay, what's happened? Did they feel slighted? Is there a feeling that there's nepotism? There's the feeling like, you know what? Every time there's issues going on with Jim and Jane, Jane gets her way because she's a more extroverted, but the other person who's introverted doesn't say much. And I could look in our team meetings and say, well, it doesn't matter because I see what happens. Jane wins every time. So it's really for the betterment of making sure that everybody has what they need for that common vision. And if pieces are missing, what's going on? Should become your hypothetical stance to say, Roxanne's disconnected. She was always self-driven and could get things done and was giving us ideas. And lately, she's just doing it. But
She's a turn it up.
exhilaration or excitement, what's happening there?
Yeah.
And then the more that you get to know about that, it may have nothing to do with the company. That's one thing that you get them, obviously, whatever sports they need. But if it's within the company, that's where your light needs to go on with what do I need to facilitate what this person needs.
Okay. And I presume that goes back to what we spoke about earlier on in terms of retention of employees and, making sure that there's less absences from work, that kind of thing as well.
Absolutely. And if people go off, you don't want the recycling door, the revolving door, right? So it's I got, my short term, it's 2.5 months, and I go off and I don't make any change and I come back and next quarter it's something else. So how are you really addressing it so that it doesn't cost you? Because when you lose a really good employee, if you were to look at the numbers, it's almost they say it's almost about 6 months salary, a replacement cost to get a really good employee again. So to really value the people that you know are good and, you know, give them recognition, like have your check-ins and have those kudos in different ways. The extrovert wants to be told how great they are, but the introvert is going to be, be scampering if you bring them up on a Friday meeting. But there's other ways that you can also, let that person know how much you value them with something significant but quiet. So again, I think it's knowing people and what you need.
Brilliant. This is such great advice. And as you said, we're all leaders. We're all leaders in some shape or form. You might have a large company, you might have a small company, but in your life, you're leading relationships. So this advice has been so worthwhile. And thank you so much for sharing all your expertise with us. So if somebody wanted to find you, Roxanne, where's the best place?
Well, my website, roxannedurhodge.com, and I'm on all socials, but I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. So just Roxanne Durhodge on LinkedIn as well. If people wanted to do a really quick quiz to see how authentically connected they are to their relationships, they could just go to roxannedurhodge.com/quiz. And they'll be able to kind of do a really quick mini quiz, a minute or two, and they could do it for work or home or both. And we'll send you back a little mini report with some recommendations and potentially next steps to consider. So they can check that out.
Oh, that sounds really, really, really interesting. Well, thank you so much for that again. And I look forward to checking out the quiz myself.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you.
That's it, everyone. That's another episode of the Social Media Takeaway. If you have some feedback, make sure that you tag us on social media. You'll find me under Sell on Social M, or on LinkedIn, you'll find me under Louise McDonald. I'd love to hear your feedback and what you thought about the show. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any future episodes. And if you know anyone who may be interested, be sure to share the show with them too. Thanks, everyone.